300 million years ago, long before dinosaurs existed, creatures the size of cars dominated the Earth. Imagine salamanders bigger than modern crocodiles, with teeth sharp as knives and bodies that could reach 30 feet long. These amphibian monsters lived in giant swamps that covered entire continents, in a world where the air had so much oxygen that dragonflies were the size of eagles and centipedes grew up to 6 feet. Earth was so different that you couldn't survive even 1 minute breathing that supercharged air. But here's the mystery that confuses scientists to this day. How did creatures that needed water to live manage to dominate the entire planet, even dry places? And even more impressive, why did these giants disappear completely, leaving only their small, harmless cousins we know today? Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from what part of the world you're watching, because now I'm going to tell you everything. What if you opened your eyes and stepped outside and nothing you saw looked familiar? Imagine a world where the land is not split into continents, but joined together as one enormous and endless stretch of ground. This is what Earth looked like about 300 million years ago. The world was wrapped into a single huge continent called Pangaea. Everything about it felt different: the ground, the sky, the plants, and the air. If you walked here, nothing would remind you of today. At this time in Earth's history, there were no countries and no oceans between large bits of land. Instead, all the ground formed a supercontinent. The name of this supercontinent was Pangaea. It covered a very large part of the planet. You could have started walking at one end of it and kept going for many, many days without seeing the sea. The land stretched on and on as far as you could see, connecting what are today very distant places. The color you would notice the most in this strange Earth would be green. Not just a little green, but green everywhere you look. Most of Pangaea was covered by dense forests. These forests were nothing like those in our own time. They were made up of plants that do not exist today. The forest floor was soft and muddy, and there were swamps and wetlands everywhere. Some places were so full of water it was hard to walk without sinking. Every step could bring your foot down into thick mud or cold, dark water. The trees here did not have flowers. There were no bright-colored blossoms to be seen. The plants were mostly ferns, club mosses, and horsetails. Many of them towered above the ground, reaching high into the sky. Their leaves spread wide and thick, making the sunlight thin and weak by the time it reached the ground. In some places, it was always dim. There were so many plants growing close together, it was difficult for the sun to peek all the way down. In these forests, the air felt heavy and moist. You would feel a constant, gentle touch of water on your skin. It was almost always rainy, and the warmth never seemed to go away. The ground never dried out, and puddles and small ponds were everywhere. Even the hills and the valleys looked soft and blended. They turned into each other under the thick cover of plants. Nothing was left open and dry on this huge, ancient continent. The sound of water filled the air. You could hear drops falling from big leaves. There were the rustles of bugs and the movement of animals near the mud and ponds. The ground smelled rich and full, like wet plants. It felt as if everything was alive or about to come to life. Many strange shapes moved quickly in the shadows. These were animals and insects that were very different from those you know today. The air itself was very special. When you breathe the air now, there is some oxygen in it, and you need this oxygen to live. But on this old Earth, the air held even more oxygen than you find today. You would feel it, even if you did not know the reason. The extra oxygen made it easier for all living things to grow large. Both animals and plants reached huge sizes because the world was giving them what they needed. The air tasted deep and rich, even heavy sometimes, and it was easy to fill your lungs. Walking on Pangaea 300 million years ago, you would hardly recognize the land. Places that are deserts now were wet back then. Your feet would have sunk into mud in places where there is now only sand and dust. There were hardly any open fields. Instead, thick forests pressed close from every side, their dark shadows hiding pools, swamps, and streams. Illness and harsh weather visited less often than today. Winters were not as cold. The temperature mostly stayed warm. When storms did come, they brought great rains that lasted for many days and nights. This rain kept the ground wet and helped all the plants and animals thrive. When the clouds cleared, the world did not dry out quickly. Wetness stayed in the air, almost as if the land itself was always covered by a fine, invisible blanket of warm mist. If you explored the forests, the plants would have amazed you. They grew in thick layers, one pressing against another. Each one fought for a patch of sunlight high above the ground. Ferns as high as houses waved their broad leaves. Club mosses reached up with rough, scaly trunks. Horsetails stretched tall and straight, each stem shooting up like a thin pole. The plants did not bloom, but they were endless in shapes and shades of green. On the ground, you could not see very far. The many stems, leaves, and roots blocked every path. It was easy to get lost here. Sometimes the thick plants formed tangled walls around small pools and moist hollows. The mud was dark and deep, made from old leaves and stems that had fallen over many years. The scent of this soft, rotting plant matter filled the air, along with the smell of water. As you looked closer, you would also see things moving in the corner of your eye. There were living creatures everywhere. Some were animals, others were insects, and some were small plants or strange fungi, but nothing you recognized from today could be found here. Instead, there were giant amphibians. These were not frogs or salamanders like the ones we know in our time. They were much larger, and their bodies were thick and strong. Their skin looked soft and moist, and they needed to be near water at all times, or they would dry out and die. The shapes of these creatures would have surprised you. Some were long and stretched out, with bodies like logs and strong, wide heads. Their jaws were large, and inside their mouths were many teeth, sharp and strong. These animals had legs built for pushing through mud and plants. Though they could walk on land, they often stayed close to swamps, ponds, and rivers, where the water kept their skin wet and cool. Often you would have seen some of these giant amphibians resting in shallow pools or hiding among the roots of tall plants. Some were the length of a small car, while the largest could reach lengths as great as 9 meters. They moved slowly, but could be quick when they wanted to catch something to eat. Their eyes watched quietly from the water, waiting for smaller animals to come near. Then, with a fast motion, they lunged forward, grabbing their food in powerful jaws. The giant amphibians were not alone in these ancient forests. There were also many insects and other creatures with hard shells and long legs. Some of these insects were much bigger than any insect alive today. For example, you might have seen a dragonfly with wings as wide as your arms spread wide. The dragonfly would fly slowly through the warm, thick air looking for food. Some bugs crawled across the ground and over plants, their bodies as long as people's arms, or even longer. The size of these creatures was strange, but the world allowed them to become so big because of all the extra oxygen in the air. The forests of Pangaea looked after these huge animals and insects. The thick plants made many hiding places. The low light under the tall ferns and mosses kept the ground damp. There were always pools of water and wide, slow rivers winding through the forest. The world was peaceful, but also full of danger because most creatures were predators and hunted other animals to live. Every part of this ancient world seemed to connect to water. The wetness was important for everything. None of these animals could live long in dry places. Most needed to have water on their skin and in the air. Even the plants showed this need, as their leaves collected rain and dripped it slowly to the ground. In the deepest parts of the forest, it felt like it had just rained, even when the sky was clear. Time passed slowly in this world. When a tree or plant died, it fell into the damp mud and started to break down. Layers and layers of these dead plants piled up for many years. Over time, the pressure and special conditions in the mud turned these dead plants into coal. This coal is what people today find deep in the ground and sometimes use for energy. This long process began with the forests of Pangaea, so these ancient swamps are connected to the world today. Even the atmosphere's makeup added its own strange features. The heavy, oxygen-rich air made fires burn hotter and faster, so if there was ever a lightning strike, whole sections of dry forest could burn very quickly. But most of the time, things did not burn easily because everything was so wet. Only when a part of the forest dried for a short while did fire become a threat. The animals of this time lived close to the edge of water, and their lives were ruled by rain and wetness. Their bodies show us how important water was. They had wide feet for walking on soft ground and shrank away from anything too dry or sunny. The plants also depended on water and grew thicker and stronger near ponds, lakes, and rivers. This strange green world did not last forever. Over thousands and thousands of years, the shape of the land and the way of life began to change. But for very long periods, the forests were always full. The air was heavy and moist, and the land was joined in one massive continent. It was a time of quiet, green life, giant animals, and a world that barely showed the sun to the ground beneath its thick roof of leaves. This was how Earth looked 300 million years ago, strange, green, wet, and filled with life in every corner. The first step into this ancient world shows us just how different things can be. Everything changes over great stretches of time, and the world we live in now came from a place far older and stranger than we can easily imagine. In this world, the stage was set for creatures that would shape the earth for millions of years to come. Every part of the land was filled with thick green life. All around, the forests spread as far as your eyes could see. There were no open fields or empty spaces. The world was not quiet, and it was not still. The forests were alive at every level, from the soft mud on the ground to the tops of the tallest plants reaching high above your head. In these ancient forests, almost everything you saw was a plant you would not find today. There were no flowering plants here. You would not see any petals bright with color, and no fruits or seeds like apples or berries. The air felt simple and wet, without the sweet smell of flowers. All the green you saw came from ancient types of plants, which covered every space with stems, leaves, and branches. The main plants in these forests were ferns, club mosses, and horsetails. These plants did not grow flowers or fruits. Instead, they made spores, tiny dust-like parts that floated through the air to help more plants grow. The spores traveled on the wind, settling wherever it was wet enough for new life to begin. As you walked, you would sometimes see small clouds of these spores drifting in the air, making the forest seem even softer and more magical. The ferns in this world grew very large. Their leaves, called fronds, spread out wide and long. Some ferns reached as high as the roof of a house. These tall fronds blocked sunlight, making the forest floor below cool and dim. Ferns grew in groups, often close together, their stems thick and strong. All around their bases, new ferns pushed up from the soft ground, adding more layers of green. Among the ferns, there were club mosses. These were not actually mosses as we know them today, but ancient plants with stiff, scaly stems. Club mosses could grow tall, often higher than a person. Some reached the height of small trees, their thick trunks standing firm in the damp soil. Their leaves were small and pressed close against the stems, making the plant look rough and spiky. At certain times of year, these plants grew special cones at the tips of their branches, which released even more spores into the air. Horsetails were another kind of common plant. Horsetails grew like thin, straight sticks, and many stood taller than a person. Sometimes they grew in thick clusters, forming almost a living fence in the forests. The stems of horsetails had many small joints, and water dripped down their sides, making them shine in the soft forest light. The top of each horsetail was capped with a spore cone, which felt rough to the touch. Everywhere you looked, these plants crowded tightly together. The old stems and leaves that fell to the ground did not disappear quickly. Instead, they piled up, making a soft, rich layer called peat. Over many thousands of years, the weight of new plants and the wet mud pressed these old plants down, slowly turning them into coal. The forests of this time made massive amounts of this ancient peat. This is the same coal that is sometimes dug up from deep underground today. On the ground, the forests felt soft and springy. Your feet would press into thick mats of old leaves and stems. In the low places, water gathered into pools and streams. The plant roots wove in and out of the mud, holding the ground together. Sometimes the wet ground swallowed the roots and stems, burying them out of sight for thousands or even millions of years. Sunlight was precious in these forests. The many tall plants took most of the light for themselves, spreading their fronds and stems wide. Only tiny bits of sunlight made it all the way to the muddy ground. Here on the forest floor, smaller ferns and tiny green plants grew in almost constant shade. The green light and soft air gave the place a quiet feeling. Droplets of water hung on leaves and stems, waiting for gravity to pull them down. Many plants in this world grew much bigger than any you see on the land today. The club mosses, for example, could be as tall as a modern building with several stories. Their thick, woody trunks could measure the width of a table. These huge plants helped make the forests crowded and dark, giving shelter to all kinds of animals and insects. When one of these giant plants died, it fell down with a great crash, making space for new plants to grow and letting some sunlight touch the ground before being blocked again. The horsetails also reached their highest size during these ages. Today's horsetails are small, mostly only reaching your knee, but in these ancient forests, horsetails could be taller than a grown person. Their hollow stems allowed water to pass through quickly. After a rain, the forest would drip and sparkle as beads of water rolled down every plant. Without flowers, the forests did not have bees, butterflies, or hummingbirds. Instead, tiny insects and the wind helped move the spores from plant to plant. When it rained, the spores got stuck to wet leaves and sometimes floated in puddles where they grew into new plants. Life in these forests happened slowly but steadily because there was always enough water and always enough shade. The look of the forest changed with every step you took. In low places, swamps took over. Here the ground was so wet that even the biggest plants sometimes tipped over, their roots unable to hold in the slippery mud. These deep swamps hid pools of dark water between the roots of club mosses and ferns. The water was often full of floating leaves and drifting wood, and every breath brought the smell of fresh and rotting plants. Some trees had thick bark, twisted by the pressure of many years of wet weather. When lightning hit, the bark would sometimes catch fire, burning a small hole in the green sea, but the heavy rain and wet air made it difficult for the flames to spread far. Most of the time, the swamp pulled the fallen trees down into its mud, where they would slowly change into peat and then into coal. As you walked on dry ridges above the main swamp, the ground felt firmer and the air a bit lighter. The plants changed a little here, with more ferns and bushier horsetails. The animals liked these places too. finding it easier to move around and hunt for food. Long, stiff roots from the club mosses and ferns wove across the ground and sometimes stuck up in the air. When storms came, heavy rain would pour through the leaves, crashing to the ground in big drops. The water ran in channels and small streams, sometimes rising and flooding low parts of the forest. These floods carried old plant material away, helping to form new swamps somewhere else. When the rain ended and the sun broke through the clouds, steam would rise from the ground, making the air hazy and warm. Over many generations, these plants changed the world in quiet but powerful ways. Each new layer of plant material that fell helped build up the ground. Each spore that drifted on the wind had the chance to begin a new plant, which might grow for many years before falling, joining the soft mat below. In some parts of the forests, the club mosses grew to form open woodlands. Their trunks made small clearings where light could reach down and ferns could grow thick and fast. These green rooms were beautiful, wet, and always full of life. Sometimes streams spread through these open places, the water reflecting the thick leaves above. Every season brought change. When it rained for many days and nights, the water level in the swamps would rise, and the whole forest could become an endless pool. Old plants floated, helping new ones spread by carrying their spores to new places. During drier periods, smaller plants grew in every bit of sunlight, racing for space before being crowded out again by bigger, older plants. Climbing high in the club mosses and tall ferns, there were strange shapes that were not plants. These were the earliest forms of fungus and moss, clinging to the damp plant stems and living on small pieces of decaying wood. The fungus helped break down old plants faster, making the soil richer over the years. This was important, as the rich, soft ground allowed so many plants and animals to thrive. Beneath the water in the swamps lived the start of new life. Some plants sent their roots into the mud, using their stems to reach up into the air and find light. Plants that grew here often made their own air bubbles, trapped under the leaves, so they could breathe even if the water covered them completely. Over time, these water-loving plants turned the deepest pools into soft, green islands where animals could hide and rest. There were no tall, leafy trees as we know them today. All the plants of the Carboniferous forests shared the air and water without the help of seeds or flowers. They spread using spores, and they grew strong thanks to the warm, moist air filled with extra oxygen. These new conditions created forests that were richer, denser, and darker than any you will find anywhere in the world today. Inside the forests, everything depended on water and shade. When sun broke through the top layer, it made bright spots where small plants sparkled, covered in tiny drops. In these places, insects gathered, looking for fresh leaves and wet stems. Giant dragonflies with delicate wings large enough to brush the leaves landed and took off again, hunting for food. The forests were full of movement, sound, and change. Animals in the Carboniferous forests relied on the plants for food and shelter. The plants gave shade, protected the pools, and helped hold the land together. When the biggest club mosses fell, they left spaces that became homes for animals and resting places for insects. Old plant leaves and stems became food for many types of creatures. The thick roots made tunnels and hiding spots, keeping life safe from bigger predators. Because of the thick forests, the land during this time did not change quickly. The same wet, green conditions stayed for a long time. The climate was steady, and the air always held enough water for plants to grow very tall and wide. This helped set the rules for how every other living thing survived, moved, and hunted. Sometimes the water in the biggest swamps turned dark and still. Gas bubbles rose from deep under the thick mud, carrying the smell of old, rotting plants. These pools trapped fallen stems, leaves, and even animals, burying them deep under new layers of green. Many fossils today come from these ancient swamps, showing us how the plants once ruled this wet world. The forests and swamps of the Carboniferous period gave shape to everything that lived there. They controlled which animals could move, where they could find food, and where they could hide. Everything depended on the plants, their shade, their water, their layers of old and new growth. Even the smallest insects found a home in these thick green forests. This green world was not empty or silent. Each hour, countless new spores floated through the air. Each day, old leaves fell and were replaced by fresh, bright green. The forests sang with the soft sounds of rain, the calls of insects, and the slow splash of animals in the swamps. All of these plants, great and small, ruled the land 300 million years ago. The forests shaped the lives of every creature that lived in them, from the largest amphibian to the smallest bug hidden under a leaf. As you moved through this world, every step showed how deep and important the forests were to life on ancient Earth. From one side of the ancient continent to the other, the forests and swamps formed an unbroken sea of green, fed by warm rain and filled with shadows. In these forests, new life began with every spore and ended as another layer, helping to make the ground softer and deeper. Water, shade, and thick green life shaped every part of the Carboniferous world, setting the stage for the strange, giant animals that called these forests their home. Inside these endless forests and swamps, the climate and the air shaped everything that lived and grew. Every tree, plant, insect, and animal depended on the weather and the special mix of gases in the air. For many thousands of years, the world stayed mostly warm and filled with rain. There were no cold winters like the ones known today in many places. Instead, the days and nights often remained gentle and wet, with clouds above and soft mist on the ground. The sky was often gray or white with clouds. Sometimes sunlight pushed through small openings, lighting up patches of green leaves or pools of water. The warmth in the air was always there, pressing on your skin and filling your lungs with gentle, moist air. Rain fell often. There were short showers that splashed quickly across the leaves, and there were also long, steady storms that lasted for many days and nights. After a heavy rain, water filled the swamps and ran in small streams, feeding every part of the forest. The warmth and the rain were not the only things that made this world different. The very air itself was special. Today, people breathe air that is made mostly of two gases, oxygen and nitrogen. Modern air does not have a great deal of oxygen, but in the Carboniferous times, the air was very different. There was much more oxygen. In some places, almost half of the air was filled with oxygen, much more than what humans breathe now. This thick, heavy air felt rich and almost sweet to anything alive. The extra oxygen made a big difference for everything that breathed. Plants used this oxygen in their own way, but it was the animals and insects that changed the most. They could take long, deep breaths, and their bodies could grow bigger and stronger. The energy from the air helped them move and hunt. Because of this, the ancient world was full of creatures that reached sizes not seen today. The special climate of these times began with a mix of heat and rain. The supercontinent Pangaea had its own weather patterns. With so much land joined together, the air over Pangaea heated up quickly. When warm air rose, it met cool air brought by ocean winds. This created clouds and stormy weather. As these clouds drifted over the forests, they dropped heavy rains. The water soaked into every part of the land, keeping it wet and cool. The close-packed forests helped hold in the moisture. The tall ferns, club mosses, and horsetails reached far above the muddy ground, locking in shade and water. When rain fell, the leaves caught most of it first, then dripped the water slowly to the lower layers and finally to the ground. This kept the air full of mist and kept the forest dark and ready for more life to grow. On the ground, rainwater did not rush away quickly. The layers of dead plant matter and thick roots held it in place. Rivers and streams were slow, spreading out and sometimes covering large parts of land to make wide, shallow swamps. These wet places changed slowly as plant matter built up and water found new paths to follow. The warm, muggy air was good for life but also made it easy for dead things to break down. As leaves fell and plants died, bacteria and tiny creatures in the mud broke them down into smaller parts. This made the soil richer and helped feed new plants, which could then grow quickly in the warm, moist earth. In this world, storms could be powerful. Great flashes of lightning sometimes struck the tallest plants or the driest patches of forest. There were great cracks and loud booms as trees split or caught fire. But most times, the constant rain quickly put out any fires and the plants grew back even thicker than before. Not every part of Pangaea was always wet. There were some areas closer to the center of the supercontinent where the air was not as full of moisture. In these places, it was sometimes drier, with fewer swamps and smaller forests. But even here, the climate was warmer than what these places would see in later times. Instead of deserts, there were grasslands with scattered plants and perhaps some small forests. The special air, so full of oxygen, affected not only the plants and animals but the land itself. Fires, when they did happen, burned hotter and more quickly because of all the oxygen. Sometimes, after a very dry spell, a spark or lightning strike would start a fire that could move very fast. Still, this was not common because wetness was the rule for most of the world during the Carboniferous period. As time passed, the mix of warmth, rain, and oxygen created a world where nearly every bit of space was covered with life. The wettest places held the thickest plants, the richest mud, and the most animals and insects. The air felt soft and heavy at all times. Insects fluttered and crawled all around, their bodies often large and strong. Animals grew wider, longer, and heavier than most creatures alive today because the special mix in the air let them use much more oxygen every time they breathed. Walking through this world, you would feel the difference in your own chest. Breathing was easy and full. The smell of rotting leaves and green plants filled all the air. Every puddle reflected the thick sky above, and every tree held water in its bark and leaves. If you touched the ground, your hand would come away wet, covered in bits of old plants and tiny crawling bugs. The plants and animals shaped the climate as much as the climate shaped them. The vast forests removed carbon dioxide from the air, letting oxygen build up. These plants needed water to grow, and as they grew bigger and thicker, they trapped even more rain and kept the world wet. It was a cycle that built a green, living blanket across much of the planet. Floods were common in this world. After days of rain, whole patches of forest would drown underwater, sometimes for weeks at a time. Plants that could not live with their roots underwater for long would die, but many others grew stronger in the flooded places. Their leaves stretched up to find the surface, and their roots grew sideways to stay above the thickest mud. Little by little, each flood helped move new soil, changed the shape of streams, and brought new life to every corner. Not far from these wet forests, the air could change suddenly. Sometimes a shift in wind direction brought dry, hot air from the land's center. For a day or two, the forest felt warmer and drier, but soon the rains would return, filling the sky with the steady sound of drops on leaves and mud. Cloud cover was important in these forests. Too many sunny days could dry out the ground, but the forests themselves helped make their own weather, trapping cool air and making rain more likely to return. Seasons were not as strong or important as they are in many places today. In the Carboniferous world, the temperature hardly changed from warm to cool. There were no icy winters, and there were only gentle changes in heat from season to season. Sometimes it was a little hotter or a little colder, but it almost never became truly cold in the lowland forests and swamps. Above the forests, the sky was often a pale gray or soft blue, covered in layers of mist and low clouds. When the sun did appear, it made the wet plants shine and the small streams glitter. On the rare dry days, the air felt thick and warm, soaking into every surface. At night, fog often settled over everything, making the world quiet and hidden until morning. Every drop of water in this world mattered. Plants, animals, and even rocks were shaped by the steady soaking of rain and the never-ending flow of streams. Some ancient rocks show marks of the water that shaped them so long ago, with patterns and colors left by the rise and fall of floods. Plants needed this water always, and so did every animal that walked, crawled, flew, or swam in the ancient forests. Living in this world meant always adapting to water and warmth. Creatures that needed dry places could find higher ground, but most life depended on being near ponds, streams, or deep swamps. It was in these places that the most strange and wonderful animals grew. Some swam in the dark ponds by night, while others walked through the wet ferns by day. The climate made their lives possible, and every part of their bodies showed it. Because the air was heavy with moisture, sound traveled easily. The calls of animals, the hum of insects, the splash of creatures moving in the mud, and the steady drip of water made a quiet chorus at all times. Birds did not yet live in these forests, but their place was filled by the noise of huge insects and early amphibians splashing and calling to one another. Sometimes, when the wind changed, cool air blew in from faraway seas. The clouds shifted, and a heavy rain washed the old leaves from the trees. The scent of wet soil grew stronger. Pools deepened, and streams widened. Some creatures came out in the wet dark to search for food, while others hid until the rain passed and the air calmed again. Even the light was changed by this climate. With clouds and thick leaves above, daylight was never very bright. Shadows were soft and moved slowly as the sun passed overhead. On brighter days, some colors shimmered on the wet leaves, but much of the forest remained dark and quiet, helping the biggest animals move unseen among the ferns and club mosses. The long periods of steady warmth and high oxygen did more than help plants grow. This special environment let animals and insects become giants. Dragonflies, for example, had wings as wide as a child is tall. Some millipedes and centipedes grew longer than a grown person. These creatures needed all the oxygen they could get to feed their large bodies. When they moved through the air or mud, their breathing took in great amounts of oxygen, making their muscles work well, even as they grew larger than anything seen today. This special time was not only important because of the size and number of living things. The steady climate also changed the land for millions of years after. The plants that died and sank into the mud ended up as coal deep below the Earth's surface. Every piece of this coal is a memory of the forests and swamps and the wet, warm air that filled the landscape. Plants and animals also left marks in stone and soil. Fossils show the shapes of leaves, the patterns of stems, and the size of ancient creatures. When scientists study these fossils, they can know the kind of air that existed, how hot or cold it was, and how much water fell each year. By studying the layers of coal and peat, we learn just how much the climate and the air made possible. This world finally set the stage for the most powerful animals on land during the Carboniferous period, the giant amphibians. Everything about their lives, from how they breathed to where they laid eggs, was based on the weather and the thick, wet air. The world of water, green growth, soft mud, and special air was home to the largest hunters that had ever lived on land. Their story is part of this climate, atmosphere, and ancient world of rain and life. In this world, shaped by endless rain, warm air, thick forests, and deep swamps, one group of animals stood out above all others. These were the giant amphibians, the largest hunters ever to live on dry land during this ancient age. Wherever there was a pool, stream, or muddy wetland, these animals could be found. They were some of the most amazing creatures to live on Earth, and nothing else at their time could match their size or strength. The giant amphibians came in many shapes and sizes, but they all shared a few important traits. Their bodies were long and heavy, their legs were strong and solid, mostly shorter in comparison to their big bodies. Their skin was always soft, moist, and sometimes slippery. Most of these animals had wide heads with flat skulls, giving them a broad and powerful mouth. In their mouths, they had rows of sharp teeth. These teeth were not made for plants. They were pointed, perfect for grabbing and holding on to moving animals. If you could stand beside a giant amphibian, you would be surprised by its great size. Some grew as long as 9 meters, the length of a city bus. Others were smaller, but still much larger than any frog or salamander you can find in modern times. Their bodies rested low to the ground. When they moved, their bellies sometimes touched the earth or the muddy water. They had thick tails, useful for swimming or balancing as they crept close to the edge of a pond. Their eyes were set on top of their heads, allowing them to sit almost underwater while still watching everything above the surface. When hidden in the water, only their eyes and noses stayed above, giving them a quiet, careful way to hunt for food. Their nostrils were also near the top of their flat, strong skulls. This let them breathe while their heads were mostly underwater, staying hidden from prey and from dangers. The giant amphibian's skin was not covered by scales. It was soft and full of tiny holes called pores. Through these pores, they could take in water and even some oxygen from the air and water around them. But this skin could dry out very easily. That is why almost all giant amphibians spent their lives close to water, whether in slow rivers, muddy pools, or deep green swamps. When they had to leave the water, they could not go far or stay long without getting wet again. The world around them was full of thick plants and wet mud, which made life easy for these amphibians. They were excellent swimmers, pushing through the water with their wide tails or their strong back legs. On land, they crawled slowly, sometimes dragging their large bodies across the soft earth. Their wide feet spread out across the mud, keeping them from sinking too quickly. Each species of giant amphibian had its own place in the ancient world. Some lived in very deep water, hardly ever coming onto land except to rest or lay eggs. Others explored more of the swampy forest floor, looking for places where water was not too deep but not too dry. They chose spots where their skin could stay moist, where food was easy to find, and where their big bodies were safe from threats. Their sharp teeth and powerful jaws show they were hunters. They caught fish, smaller animals, bugs, and sometimes even other amphibians. When hungry, a giant amphibian could wait very still under the water, watching for any movement. When a fish or an animal came close, the amphibian could snap its jaws shut faster than most creatures could escape. Their strong legs and heavy heads helped them trap and swallow their meals quickly. These large hunters were at the top of their world. Few other animals were as big or as strong, so giant amphibians rarely faced threats from predators. Their size allowed them to move quietly through the water without much fear. Their thick bones and powerful muscles gave them strength to push aside plants as they hunted for food or looked for mates. Baby amphibians started their life in the water, just like the eggs of modern frogs and salamanders. The adult would lay eggs in ponds, swamps, or slow rivers. When the eggs hatched, the babies had soft bodies and tails for swimming, looking something like tadpoles. These young ones breathed through small gills, taking oxygen from the water. As they grew, they started to develop legs. After some time, their bodies changed, and they could leave the water for short trips on land. Only the largest and strongest had a chance to grow into the giant adults. Life was not always safe for the young. Many eggs and tadpoles were eaten by fish, insects, or even other amphibians. Only a few lived long enough to grow big and strong. Those that survived became the next generation of the largest amphibians, ready to hunt and live near the water, just like their parents. The forests, plants, and wetlands helped these animals in many ways. The thick plants gave them shade and coolness on warm days, and the deep mud kept them safe from the sun. When danger was close, a giant amphibian could quickly slip into water and hide among roots or fallen branches. The food web in these forests often began with the plants. Small insects and other creatures fed on leaves and stems. Slightly larger animals and fish fed on the insects. The giant amphibians, sitting at the top, could eat almost anything that moved and fit into their mouths. Sometimes they ate each other, since only the strongest could survive in such a world. The climate was nearly always on their side. Warm, moist air protected their sensitive skin. High levels of oxygen made it easier for their large bodies to work properly. The endless rain refilled streams and ponds, always providing the water they needed. The forests, swamps, and muddy pools made the perfect home for these top hunters. Some giant amphibians had special adaptations that helped them do even better in this wet world. Some grew bony plates under their skin for extra protection. Others had strong, wide hands or feet to help them crawl through heavy mud or push away plants. Some could close their mouths tightly to keep water out when they dove under the surface. Their hearing was very good, even better when they were partly underwater. This helped them sense movement and danger and know when prey was nearby. Their eyes were adapted to see in the soft, dim light under the thick leaves, spotting the smallest shift in water or plants. The largest of all the ancient amphibians, like the famous Eriops or Mastodonsaurus, grew to be giants. Eriops had a giant wide head and a thick, strong body, able to move both on land and in water. Its legs were muscular and spread out from the side, perfect for walking in mud or swimming through a pond. Mastodonsaurus was even bigger, with a massive skull often longer than a person is tall, filled with sharp, pointed teeth. These giants lived in the deepest waters, coming onto the muddy bank only for a short time. Other types of giant amphibians lived in smaller ponds and slow streams. Some had flat, disc-shaped bodies, which helped them hide on the bottom of a pool and burst upwards when hunting. Others had long, snake-like bodies to swim quickly and chase fish. Some had rough, knobby skin, and others had smooth, slippery skin perfect for sliding through wet plants. During much of the day, giant amphibians rested in the water, saving their energy. At dusk or sometimes in the night, they became more active. They would swim, hunt, or move between swampy areas looking for new pools and fresh prey. Their bodies were strong, but not built for speed over long distances, so they preferred to wait for their prey to come close, jumping forward with strong legs and sharp teeth. For millions of years, these animals ruled their wet world. Their size, strength, and hunting skills made them the main predator in most swamps and forests. Even the biggest insects, such as giant dragonflies or millipedes, could become prey for hungry amphibians. Because of their soft, slippery skin, they rarely spent much time far from water or in dry places. Despite all their strengths, the giant amphibians always needed water to live. Their lives circled around ponds, rivers, and swamps. In dry spells, they would dig deep into wet mud or search for remaining pools, waiting for the rain to return. Their powerful legs, flat heads, and wide mouths show just how suited they were to this unique, wet world. Over time, the world slowly started to change. Even while the forests and swamps still covered most of the land, the climate began to shift in some places. There were longer times without rain, and some wetlands became smaller. New kinds of animals quietly began to appear in the thick forests. Creatures with different bodies, new ways to lay eggs, and new ways of breathing. But for a very long time, it was the giant amphibians that controlled the land, water, and the food web. They shaped their land as much as it shaped them. Their movement made channels and pools. Their hunting kept other animal numbers in balance, and their bodies added new life to the soil when they died. The mud and swamps kept the bones of giant amphibians safe for millions of years, turning many into fossils. Today, these fossils help scientists discover what these amazing hunters looked like and how they lived. The legacy of the giant amphibians remains all over the world, hidden deep in rocks and mud. Their footprints, bones, and sometimes even marks left by their soft skin can still be found. Each fossil is a piece of their story, showing that this world of water, green, and powerful hunters really existed. The giant amphibians were the rulers of their time, perfectly made for an ancient Earth covered by forests, rain, and endless swamps. Their story is also connected to the world that shared their home. The water, the mud, the plants, and even the thick, oxygen-rich air worked together to make a place where the largest amphibians could grow, live, and hunt. Every pond, every pool, every patch of green forest gave these animals the chance to thrive and rule their world for millions of years. Everything in the ancient forests depended on water. Here, life for the giant amphibians was a careful balance between wet and dry, between moving on land and moving in water. These huge animals spent much of their lives close to ponds, slow rivers, and muddy swamps. The water was very important for them. It was not only a place to find food, but it was also needed for their bodies to stay alive. Their skin had to stay moist, or it would dry out and crack. They breathed through lungs, but could also take in a little oxygen through their skin if it was wet. Because of this, every day meant returning again and again to water. The forests, thick with club mosses and ferns, were full of sounds, water dripping from high leaves, insects singing, and sometimes the splash of a giant amphibian moving from one pool to another. These big animals used their strong legs and wide feet to push through the dense plants and muddy ground. Sometimes they moved slowly and rested in the shallows with only their heads above water, watching for danger or waiting to hunt. A giant amphibian's life began in water. The adults laid soft, jelly-like eggs in thick clusters, hiding them among water plants where they were safer from bigger animals and hungry insects. These eggs needed to stay underwater, or they would quickly dry up and not survive. After days or weeks, tiny babies called larvae hatched from the eggs. At first, these babies looked very different from the adults. They had no legs, only soft bodies and tails for swimming. They breathed with small gills, taking in oxygen directly from the water. For a long time, the young lived only in water. They ate tiny pieces of plant, floating remains, or small water animals. As they grew, their bodies changed. Legs began to form, first the back legs, and then the front legs. The gills shrank and lungs started to work. When they were strong enough, these young amphibians learned to spend some time out of water, crawling on wet mud or resting on waterlogged roots. Some stayed in the pond their whole lives if it was big and safe. Others slowly explored further away, learning to find new pools before their old pool dried up. Life outside water could be dangerous. The ground in the forest was soft and cool, But giant amphibians could not be far from a pond or swamp for long. Their skin dried fast, and the sun overhead could warm the earth too much. On rainy days, they could travel farther and look for new places to hunt. On dry days, even the giant amphibians stayed hidden, waiting for rain in the thickest, shadiest part of the forest. Many ponds and swamps were joined by small streams. These narrow waterways were like roads for the amphibians, helping them move safely through the forest. Some wandered into new pools by following the flow of water. Others made small journeys on land, always searching with care for the next cool, muddy place. Sometimes, heavy rain flooded the forest, and new ponds appeared where none had been before. The giant amphibians learned to move quickly when floods happened, making the most of new feeding grounds and hiding places while the water remained. Giant amphibians were both hunters and prey. They waited quietly in water for smaller animals to swim or walk past. Their eyes above the surface let them watch without being seen. When an animal came close, the amphibian snapped its mouth open and shut with strong jaws, swallowing its prey whole. Fish, bugs, smaller amphibians, and even some giant insects served as meals. Large amphibians could sometimes eat others of their kind that were smaller or weaker. Yet they also had to watch for danger. Some of the biggest fish could bite at young amphibians. Insects laid eggs that would eat amphibian eggs or small larvae. When the water was too shallow or dried up, the giant amphibians had to move quickly to escape or risk dying before they could find new water. The relationship between land and water shaped every detail of their day. In the very early morning, the forest was covered with mist. Giant amphibians often left the water to rest on wet ground beside the ponds. Their bodies soaked up the morning dew, keeping their skin healthy. When the sun reached higher, they often went back to water, hiding beneath floating leaves for shade and coolness. During the night, the forest became quieter except for the sound of water and the soft calls made by some amphibians. Darkness gave them safety to move between pools and hunt for new food. The air was cooler, and their skin stayed wet longer. Sometimes they moved hundreds of meters in the darkness, following the scent of water or the sounds of other animals. Not all giant amphibians lived the same way. Some kinds liked deeper water and rarely came out onto land. Their bodies were flatter and smoother, making it easy to slide underwater. They laid their eggs in the deepest parts of the pond where it was safer. Other kinds were more comfortable in shallow swamps and muddy edges. They had stronger legs and wider feet, good for crawling in sticky mud or across the rotting leaves of the forest floor. Moving between water and land took strength. Their legs were not very fast or nimble, so they did not run or climb. Instead, they crawled, using their whole bodies to push forward, sliding through wet grass and mud. Sometimes 2 or 3 giant amphibians gathered near the best pools, sharing the space as long as there was enough food to eat. Each giant amphibian knew its home area well. They remembered where the safest pools were, where the biggest fish could be found, and where the most shade waited on sunny days. When the weather changed and ponds dried up, they moved to new places, always seeking the same things: safety from the sun, moist air, deep water, and enough food to keep growing strong. The world was always changing for these animals. Some years brought much rain, new swamps appeared, and old ones grew deeper. The giant amphibians could then spread out and find many new places to live. But when rain was scarce, pools and streams grew smaller. Crowds of amphibians gathered in the last deep places, trying to survive together, sometimes eating more of the same food or even each other. When heavy storms came at last, the water rose quickly, washing out the old and bringing new hope to the forest. The connection to water also shaped how giant amphibians looked and behaved. They had big, wide mouths to catch fish and scoop up smaller creatures from the soft mud. Their eyes and nostrils were placed high on their heads, so they could see and breathe while nearly all their body was underwater. Their skin was covered in a slippery coating that helped hold in moisture, keep parasites away, and make it easy to slip past leaves and plants. Their strong jaws and teeth helped them crush hard insects or small bones. Their thick tails worked as paddles to swim strongly through weeds, and their big lungs let them hold their breath for a long time underwater. Some giant amphibians were almost silent, waiting patiently for the right moment to hunt. Others made soft noises to warn rivals or call for mates, using their deep voices to send sound through water and air. Giant amphibians were not just part of the water, they helped shape it. Their movement made small paths in the mud where water flowed more easily. Their bodies pushed plants aside, opening new clearings for smaller animals. When they dug into the wet earth to escape drought, they turned up rich soil and nutrients that fed new plants when the rain returned. Over many generations, the life of the giant amphibians linked together wetland, forest, and stream so completely that it is hard to think of one without the others. They carried seeds and plant pieces from pond to pond, spreading green life through the forest with every move. When they died, their bodies became food for many other creatures or sank into the mud, helping form the dark, rich peat that became the coal deep below the earth. Everything in their world was about finding and holding on to water. The thick forests gave shade and cooled the air, making it easier to breathe. The mist held in the low valleys brought dew to dry leaves and filled old footprints with small puddles. On the hottest days, the ground might dry for a little while, but hidden pools and deep mud stayed cool and wet, ready for the giant amphibians to uncover when they needed safety. For smaller amphibians and their larvae, the risk of drying out was even greater. They were weaker, smaller, and needed the safety of thick grass, soft mud, and floating leaves. Many were lost to the heat, hunger, or bigger animals. Only a lucky few lived long enough to grow legs and join the adults in searching for new water, new food, and new shelter. These bonds between land and water made the Carboniferous world rich with life. All the green plants, giant bugs, and other creatures depended on the cycles of rain and flood, dry times and wet times. The giant amphibians were the most powerful link between them, shaping and being shaped by every change in the world around them. Water gave them the chance to be the largest, strongest hunters, but it also set the limits for where they could go. When the world was full of rain and swamps, the giant amphibians could move, grow, and lay eggs almost everywhere. When the land dried or the climate became rough, they struggled, crowded into shrinking pools, or died if they could not find enough water. Their story was always about water, chasing it, saving it, and living by its cycles. While giant amphibians were perfectly adapted to this old world, change was always present. As time passed, small differences began to appear in the forests and ponds. Some animals and plants learned new ways to hold on to water, to travel farther away from the wettest places. Others tried new kinds of food or found ways to avoid the largest hunters. These changes grew slow and steady, but always the link between life, land, and water stayed strong. Among the many animals moving quietly in the dark, moist forest, some creatures were beginning to show new shapes and ways of living. These new animals might one day find other paths, and the world itself would keep changing around the needs and strength of all who called it home. But for this long and important time, life on land depended on the water. The giant amphibians were its champions, spreading, hunting, and living wherever there was shade, mud, and a pool deep enough to hide. Their journey between water and land, through ancient forests and across wide continents, helped make the world richer, greener, and more full of life than ever before. All across the deep green forests and the muddy swamps, there were creatures crawling, flying, and hiding everywhere. The world was not silent or still. It was full of movement and sound made by many different kinds of living things. Among these, the giant amphibians ruled the waters and the nearby land, but they were not alone. Many other creatures shared their world, and some of them were even more surprising for their size and their shapes. The warm, wet world made a perfect home for all sorts of animals, especially ones with hard shells and many legs. In this ancient time, the high amount of oxygen in the air allowed animals to grow much bigger than they can today. The forests and swamps were filled with giant insects and other arthropods. Arthropods are animals with jointed bodies, legs, and hard coverings on the outside. In this wet world, they could become very large, and their bodies took on strange and wonderful forms. Moving through the thick ferns or flying slowly in the heavy air, you could see dragonflies unlike any in our time. Their wings stretched wide, sometimes longer than the arms of a grown person. The wings were clear, like thin glass, shining in the light that made it through the trees. Their bodies were long and strong. When these giant dragonflies flew above the swamps, their movements made the leaves and water tremble. They hunted smaller insects with great speed. Their big eyes saw even the faintest movements in the mud below. On the ground and hidden in rotting plants, even larger surprises crawled. There were millipedes and centipedes with long, narrow bodies and dozens or hundreds of legs. Some of these animals reached more than 2 meters in length, with wide bodies made of many hard, shiny segments. Their legs moved in perfect waves, lifting each part of their body as they slipped quietly through the forest. These millipedes were plant eaters, chewing through dead leaves and wood. All day and all night, they helped turn old plants into soft earth and rich soil for new life. Other kinds of arthropods loved the mud and shallow pools. There were scorpions larger than any today, scuttling in and out of holes near the water's edge. Some of these scorpions could reach the size of a small dog, and their bodies were covered with a thick, tough shell. Their claws were big and strong, and their tails bent over their backs, ready to defend against anything that came too close. Unlike the scorpions we know today, many of these giant forms lived mostly in or near water, where their bodies could stay moist. Spiders, though not as big as dragonflies or millipedes, were still common in the ancient forest. They made webs between wet branches and under fallen plants, waiting for small insects to become trapped. Their long legs let them move quickly, hiding under thick leaves or chasing prey across the muddy ground. Some early spiders may have hunted on the surface of water itself, running across floating plants with ease. Smaller insects were everywhere. Fleas, beetles, and tiny fly-like creatures buzzed around clumps of moss, feeding from plants or each other. Their sizes and shapes changed with the seasons and the amount of rain. In this world of endless green, food was everywhere for those who could find it. Some insects lived their entire lives on the same plant or never moved far from the place where they hatched. In the air, the high oxygen helped insects fly with ease. Some could glide for long distances from tree to tree or across pools. Their wings beat quickly, making soft, dry noises above the wet sounds of the forest. On bright days, when the sun broke through the clouds, many insects came out together, filling the air with a gentle buzzing sound. Birds did not yet exist, so insects flew freely, only needing to watch for dragonflies and other hunters. The relationship between giant insects and other animals was an important part of the Carboniferous world. Giant dragonflies hunted many smaller creatures, catching them in the air or picking them from the tops of plants. Large millipedes ate dead leaves and rotting wood, helping to break down old plants and clean the forest floor. Scorpions stalked tiny animals in the mud and shallow water, and spiders waited quietly for prey to become trapped. Some of the smaller animals in the forest depended on these insects and arthropods for food. Baby amphibians, for example, often ate small bugs, worms, and insect larvae as they grew. A few kinds of giant amphibians would eat even the biggest millipedes or dragonflies if they could catch them near the water. The life of the forest was woven together from these connections, with each animal playing its part in the cycles of hunting and being hunted. The giant size of so many insects and arthropods was only possible because the air was so rich in oxygen. The extra oxygen helped them take in more energy, making it easier for their bodies to grow and remain strong. Today, insects must stay much smaller to survive, but for many millions of years, the world of the Carboniferous belonged to creatures whose size would seem impossible now. This world filled with giant animals was beautiful and strange. Dragonflies would rest on the thick stems of horsetails, folding their long wings with care. Millipedes crept along the mud at dawn, their bodies glistening with dew. Scorpions clawed at the soft earth near the edge of small pools, while spiders hung motionless in their sticky webs. The forest was always alive, moving and changing, filled with small feet, beating wings and soft crawling sounds that echoed in the quiet between rainfalls. In the deeper parts of the swamps, more ancient creatures lived. These included small fish that darted between roots and reeds. There were also strange armored animals, like the early relatives of crabs. Some swam in the shallow water, feeding on old plants or soft insects. Their hard shells protected them from hungry amphibians and dragonflies. The flying insects and crawling arthropods helped move seeds and spores from one place to another. When a dragonfly landed on a fern, it might pick up small bits of plant or spore on its legs, carrying life to a new part of the forest. Beetles buried themselves in the ground, digging tunnels that helped water reach the roots of plants. Each step, each movement, and each meal in this wet world helped spread life more widely across the land. Not all giant insects and arthropods were gentle. Some were fierce hunters. There were huge predatory bugs that waited in the shadows for smaller animals to walk by. Their sharp jaws or claws let them catch prey quickly and eat it before it could escape. In this world, every animal had to be watchful. The strong hunted the weak, but even the largest could be surprised or injured in the constant search for food. The seasons and the weather also changed insect life. After long rains, pools filled with floating eggs and larvae. When the sun shone, these eggs hatched into hundreds or thousands of tiny insects. Many would be eaten almost at once, but some would grow fast, becoming part of the next wave of hunters or helpers in the forest. Some insects and arthropods hid underground when the air became too dry. They dug into cool, wet mud and waited for the rain to return. Others used special shells or strong coverings to keep their bodies moist longer during the dry times. Over the generations, these creatures developed many clever ways to survive in the ever-changing weather of the ancient world. The biggest of these animals, such as the giant dragonflies called Meganeura and the huge millipedes called Arthropleura, ruled much of the forest floor and the air above. Meganeura could fly great distances above the swamps, and its wide wings carried it easily among the tree-like plants. Arthropleura crawled among roots and logs, its many legs making lines in the mud that stayed for days after it passed. Fossil tracks left by these animals are still found today, pressed deep into rocks that were once soft earth. Every part of the forest, from the tightest web in the shadows to the highest branches where the dragonflies perched, depended on the lives of these many-legged and winged creatures. Insects and arthropods helped keep the forest clean, helped plants spread, and gave food to those who hunted them. The sounds of their legs and wings mixed with the calls of giant amphibians and the drip of water. To stand quietly in this world was to feel the gentle touch of insects landing on your arm, to hear the small crash of a millipede hiding among wet leaves, and to see the shine of a dragonfly wing in the dim forest light. Even as the world slowly changed, these insects and arthropods continued to adapt. When ponds dried up, some could move to new places, flying or crawling across the land in search of the next spot made wet again by rain. When new plants grew, insects found new ways to eat, hide, or raise their young. When old insects died, their bodies sank into the mud and became part of the earth. Over millions of years, their remains helped build the dark soil, feeding plants that made new homes for even more life. In this way, every cycle, every birth, and every death in the ancient forest added to the richness of the land and water. As time went on, the story of insects and other arthropods became tied to the changes in the world around them. The size and number of these creatures would rise and fall with the air's oxygen, the pattern of the rains, and new ways of living found by plants and animals together. Life in the Carboniferous forests was not just about the giant amphibians or the deep green plants. It was also a story of wings, shells, tiny legs, and the never-ending search for food and safety. The world was large enough and rich enough for all these creatures to share the land, the water, and the air, each one important in its own way. As you look across the old forests in your mind, imagine every branch, pool, and shadow alive with movement. That is how it truly was, with the giants of the insect world and the quiet hunters moving together in a place far older than anything seen today. The ancient wet world was a place where the shapes of life were limited only by the water, the air, and the never-ending power of change. Everywhere there was water, green shade, and quiet pools. Giant amphibians made this land their hunting ground. Their lives were shaped by water and plants, but also by their own bodies, their habits, and their ways of catching food. Unlike most animals, they stayed close to water, not only for their skin, but also because it was where their strategy for living and hunting worked best. Their hunting life started early in the morning or late in the day, when the air was cool and a quiet mist covered the ponds and swamps. Giant amphibians moved with care, almost silent, sliding through mud or floating near the edge of water. Their dark colors and flat bodies helped them hide. They waited under big leaves, behind plant stems in shallow water, or half buried in loose mud. Their eyes watched carefully for movement. Once they found a good place hidden by plants, they barely moved at all. Sometimes an amphibian might wait for hours in the same spot. Ambush was the most common way to catch food. The giant amphibian would stay still, head just above water, eyes watching but the body almost invisible. When another animal swam near, like a small fish, a bug, or even a smaller amphibian, the hunter struck fast. Its wide mouth opened in a flash and sharp teeth closed over the prey. With a quick gulp, the food disappeared. Hunting needed patience. Some days brought many meals, and some days only one. But the amphibians could wait a long time, using little energy while they watched for the next chance. This way of hunting worked because of their unique bodies. Their eyes were set on top of their heads, letting them see above water, even when everything else was hidden. Their wide mouths and strong jaws made it easy to bite and hold struggling food. Sharp teeth dug into soft flesh, making escape almost impossible. Once caught, the prey was swallowed whole or in big pieces, sent down a wide throat into a strong stomach. Nothing chewed or was broken into small bits. Everything was swallowed as quickly as possible. The heavy and thick skin of giant amphibians was moist and smooth. This let them slip quickly through wet plants and mud when needed. It also helped them move through thick water without making sound. When they wanted to hunt on land, their wide feet spread their weight on soft soil, keeping them from sinking and letting them move quietly. Long, strong tails helped push against water or gave balance when climbing over roots and low branches. Some species used other ways to find food. A few giant amphibians searched muddy bottoms with their heads, flipping soft dirt with mouths to find worms, shellfish, and small bugs hiding below. Others moved slowly at night, creeping over wet ground with their bodies close to the earth, looking for sleeping animals. Their sense of smell and the fine senses on their heads guided them to these hidden meals. Even the vibrations in water or soft ground could give warning of something alive and close. Their world was not empty of risk. Sometimes another hunter came close, and two giant amphibians might meet in the shadows. These meetings could end quietly, with both moving away. At other times, they fought, snapping with jaws and slapping with tails to protect the best hunting spots or drive rivals away. Scratches and small wounds were marks of past struggles, but the strongest found enough food to heal and grow. Most of their food came from water. Slow fish, new amphibians, insects, and even the big millipedes or small scorpions were all food for a hungry giant. Some tried to catch small animals on land when rain had left the earth wet, but their size and need for moisture meant they rarely traveled far from the edge of water. Every meal was important because growing and keeping huge bodies strong took a lot of energy. When food was easy, the giant amphibians could rest and grow. During poor times, they waited, trusting that water would bring new prey soon. Eating was not a quiet or slow process. When a giant amphibian caught food, it lifted its head and swallowed hard. Sometimes, larger meals took a few tries to move down the throat. No other animal nearby could take the meal because these amphibians chased others away or kept low and hidden while eating. Once finished, they slid back into water to rest and watch for the next chance. Younger amphibians joined in hunting after their bodies grew. At first, young ones ate small water creatures and bits of plant. As their teeth and jaws grew stronger, they learned to hunt the same way as adults, hiding and waiting in the quiet pools. Some young amphibians became prey for bigger ones, and only the strongest grew up to hunt for many years. This was a hard world, and many lives ended early, but the cycle stayed the same for hundreds of thousands of years. Life changed with the weather and the seasons. After heavy rain, pools filled with food. Dead leaves, insects, and weak fish washed into new ponds and swamps. The giant amphibians explored the edges, finding trapped animals and biting into soft spots in the mud to find small creatures hiding below. When times became dry, competition increased around shrinking pools. Some amphibians fought for the same fish or insects. If the water dried completely, many died or had to crawl far, looking for a new place to start again. The hunting methods of the giant amphibians shaped everything around them. Because they were strong and ate so many kinds of animals, they helped control the number of insects, small fish, and even young creatures in the pools. Too many amphibians could mean less food for everyone, leading to more fights and more risk. When there were fewer giants, smaller animals became common again. This cycle balanced the life of the ancient wet world. The role of these hunters was important for the land, water, and every other creature. Their droppings added rich material to the soil. When they died, their bodies became part of the mud, feeding plants and smaller animals. Their movements made new spaces in the plants and mud, letting water flow in new directions and giving tiny life a place to live. The relationship with plants was close too. The thick forests gave the amphibians places to hide, cool shade to protect their skin, and soft ground to dig small holes for hiding. Fallen logs, tangled roots, and bundles of living plant stems worked as perfect shelters. Amphibians buried themselves under these during hot days or dry spells, waiting quietly for safety to return. Some giant amphibians chose favorite places for hunting and resting. They returned to the same spot again and again, leaving smooth marks in the mud and gentle paths through the plants. Others wandered all the time, moving from pool to pool as water and food changed. Both ways worked, as long as the world was still full of water, green shade, and food. Their long history showed adaptation to every change. Some grew rougher, thicker skin for dry days. Others learned to move quietly through darkest night to find food or to hide better. Over great spans of time, each small change helped a few individuals survive and pass along good traits. When new bugs arrived, when plants shifted, when rain patterns changed, the amphibians adjusted their habits or moved to better places. Many soft sounds marked the life and hunting of these animals. The gentle splash of a tail, the ripple made by a head rising above water, or a low, throat-deep call through the pond in dusk. These sounds warned others, called for mates, or even let two amphibians know their space was safe to share. Some ancient hunters grew much larger teeth, useful for biting into tougher hide or catching slippery prey. Others formed big, flat skulls to press into mud and scare away smaller animals. These physical features were tested in both hunting and fighting. The best went on to be copied by new generations. Amphibians helped keep insect numbers in check, shaped water plants by breaking their stems or eating the animals that lived on them, and opened new spaces in the forest for light and water to reach fresh places. In every way, hunting and living healed the world, balanced life, and kept the carboniferous forests and swamps healthy and full. The presence of so many different hunters did not prevent other new animals from arriving and trying new ways of life. At the edges of the ancient ponds and forests, tiny changes began in the bodies of new kinds of animals. Some small lizards and animals with tougher skins walked on land even when the world was dry. They started to look for food away from water, and their bodies changed in small steps, giving them new chances to survive. For a long while, the giant amphibians remained the most important hunters. Their numbers shaped the forest, the pools, and the very life of every animal and plant around them. The world stayed much the same, with great green forests, deep watery homes, and the endless sound of quiet hunting in the dawn, the dusk, and the night. Each passing generation brought new small changes. As new plants grew thicker or different, as bugs got larger or smaller, as dry times came with greater strength, the amphibians and their habits were tested again and again. Yet they stayed as rulers for millions of years, their hunting ways marking each pool and forest across the ancient world. Every stone found today, showing a mark of their teeth or the shape of their wide skulls, tells of this time. Every fossilized print in ancient mud is a memory of their quiet, patient hunts. Each fossil bone is a piece of their story, joined to everything that lived, everything that died, and everything that changed in a world filled by water, green shade, and the silent movement of the carboniferous forest. The story of the hunters did not end with them. In time, their world began to shift, shaped by new animals finding ways to live further from water, in new places with new dangers and new food. The old world of giant amphibians still gave shelter and life, but the edge of change moved quietly but steadily, just as the amphibians had once moved in the shadow of the forest. As the world of water, plants, and hunting amphibians thrived, new changes quietly began in the shadows of the forests and at the muddy edges of the swamps. While giant amphibians still ruled, some small animals were beginning to live differently. These new animals started to appear in more places, testing new ways to move, eat, and have young. Some of these creatures were the first early reptiles, and their arrival would start to change the balance of life on land. Early reptiles were not large at first. Many were small, with bodies that could seem weak beside the giant amphibians. But these new animals had something special. Their bodies did not dry out as quickly. Their skin was tougher and less moist than the skin of the amphibians. They did not need to stay close to water during the day. This gave them an advantage in a world where rain and dry spells could come and go without warning. The most important difference was in the way early reptiles laid their eggs. Unlike amphibians, whose soft eggs needed to stay underwater, the eggs of reptiles were covered with a protective shell. The shell was not hard like that of a chicken's egg, but it was tough enough to keep water inside. This meant that the baby inside could grow and develop safely, even if the egg was not in a pond or swamp. Early reptiles could lay their eggs on damp soil, under leaves, or inside hidden nests, far from pools and streams. This one simple change allowed early reptiles to live in new ways. Now, these animals could move away from swamps and search for food in drier forests, empty clearings, and even rocky hills. They could walk without waiting for rain or waiting for puddles to form. Their tough skin held water inside, and their eggs did not dry out easily. Even their breathing was different. Reptiles could take deep breaths using strong, simple lungs. Their bodies did not have to stay wet for oxygen to pass through their skin. The forests and swamps were still full of giant amphibians, but early reptiles explored the places amphibians could not go. They searched for insects, soft plants, and even small eggs hidden in the grass or under old leaves. Their sharp eyes and quick legs helped them escape danger. When giant amphibians came close, these reptiles could run over dry ground, hide among thick roots, or climb over rocks that would have left a giant amphibian stuck. Many early reptiles were gentle and shy, coming out at dawn or dusk when the world was cool and quiet. Others were more bold, running between ferns and horsetails, searching for any small meal that could be found. Their bodies were light and easy to move, and their long tails helped them keep balance. Some had sharp claws for digging or for holding onto slippery logs. Living away from water was not the only thing that changed these animals. Some began to eat different kinds of food, choosing insects or fresh leaves, seeds or tiny eggs. Early reptiles explored every corner of the land, using their senses to search for food others could not reach. They learned where to find shelter from the hot sun, where to dig in moist dirt, and where to lay eggs safely away from large hunters. These new habits helped early reptiles live longer and spread their young to new places. With every new nest, their numbers grew. Forests and hills that had only known amphibians now felt the feet of these smaller, quicker reptiles. They moved quietly, but the change was real. Every season there were more reptiles in more places. While the climate was wet and full of ponds, giant amphibians did not notice much danger. Their numbers stayed strong in the thickest swamps. But in places where water was hard to find, reptiles began to outnumber amphibians. They needed less water and could wait out dry times by hiding in shade or digging proper burrows. The thick forests began to shift, too. Where once only ferns and club mosses had blocked out the sun, now small patches of drier ground opened between the plants. Droughts, changes in weather, or loss of wetland created new open spaces. Here, reptiles flourished. They made their homes in fallen logs, under rocks, between high roots, and in the cool, dark soil. Even their bones were different. Early reptiles had stronger, firmer skeletons than most amphibians. Their legs pushed outwards, allowing faster movement across all kinds of ground. Later, some of these reptiles began to stand taller, with legs beneath their bodies. This made walking easier, and it helped them escape danger more quickly. Reptiles did not take over the world all at once. For a long time, there were many places where amphibians ruled every pool, swamp, and river. The reptiles stayed on the edges, exploring new land as it opened and spreading slowly. But change continued. Every new season brought another small shift. Over many millions of years, the balance slowly turned toward the animals who needed less and less water. Their eggs survived on drier ground so reptiles could have young even when a pond dried out. Their tough skin protected them from losing water, and their light bones made it easier to travel farther from home. Some even climbed up plants or into small trees, searching for fruit, seeds, or hidden insects to eat. Danger was everywhere, but the reptiles had more options. A reptile that lost a good home could move on, searching for safety somewhere else. A few new plants also began to join the ancient forests. These plants, called seed ferns, produced seeds that could live for weeks or months before growing. Unlike spores, which needed to find water right away, seeds stayed in place, waiting for the right time. Reptiles often found food in these seeds, or used the soft leaves as shelter for their eggs, helping both plants and animals survive in the new world. The growing number of reptiles changed the life of insects, amphibians, and even some of the plants. Insects found new predators in the quick reptiles who chased them across logs and dry leaves. Amphibians discovered that their eggs, left in shallow pools, were sometimes eaten by hungry reptiles at night. The food web slowly shifted, and every new animal added a new piece to the puzzle. As these changes happened, some early reptiles also fought with each other. They competed for the best places to lay eggs, the warmest sunny spots, or the juiciest food. Only the strongest survived to make more young. The world was full of new challenges and new ways to live. In the oldest, wettest swamps, amphibians remained for a long time. Some became even larger, trying to stay ahead of the smaller, quicker reptiles. They moved deeper into water, laid more eggs, and grew long, flat bodies to swim faster. For many years, the two groups lived at the same time, each finding the homes and food they needed. As dry periods grew more common, reptiles spread even faster. Their bodies held water better, and their eggs could wait in safe places until rain returned. When ponds dried up, amphibians died or fell in number, but reptiles kept living and growing in the open lands. These adaptations were the key for reptiles to become the next rulers of the land. Changes did not happen overnight. It was a slow and long process. In the beginning, reptiles were fewer than amphibians. The largest hunters were still amphibians near the water. But over many generations, reptiles used every dry spell, every patch of sunshine, and every new space to make their numbers stronger. Many reptiles became more than just simple hunters. As time passed, some developed harder shells, sharper teeth, or longer, stronger tails for swimming and balance. Some became almost as large as the amphibians, but they kept their tough skin and special eggs. A few even returned to the water to hunt, but they could always come back to the land where amphibians could not follow. The early reptiles started a new chapter in the history of life on Earth. Their success was because they could do what the big amphibians could not: live away from water, raise their young in new places, find new foods in dry times, escape danger over long distances, and last through hard seasons of sun and drought. This was a very big change, and it would shape all of the time that followed. As the seasons and climate shifted, as plants and ponds came and went, and as reptiles found new ways to survive, the ancient age of giant amphibians slowly gave way to the age of animals that walked safely on dry ground. Their eggs dried less in the sun, their bodies lost less water in heat, and their young found new homes wherever there was space. Step by step, the world changed as new creatures took their place among the green, the mud, and the open sky. As small reptiles became more common and spread across the forests, swamps, and dry places, life for the giant amphibians began to change. The world was not the same as it was in earlier times. For many millions of years, the green forests and deep swamps had been safe and full of food for the large amphibians. Now these places started to shrink. The land was not always filled with water anymore. The plants that once grew in every patch of mud slowly became thinner, and the swamps started to disappear in some parts of the world. The weather changed over long ages. It did not happen in one day or one year, but slowly and quietly, year after year. There were new seasons with less rain. Some places that always had water became dry for much longer. The air began to feel different. There was less mist and soft fog in the morning. Long stretches of land dried out. The soft, muddy ground hardened into dry soil. Pools that were once deep became shallow or disappeared. Rivers shrank, calling all the water animals together into crowded, shrinking ponds. The forests themselves started to look different. Some of the old ferns and club mosses became less common. These plants needed very wet soil to grow. As their homes dried out, they died, and other plants that could live with less water took their place. New trees that grew from seeds and harder, woodier plants became more common. These trees gave less shade and did not keep the ground as wet as before. The sunlight that had once struggled to reach the ground now shone brighter and hotter through the thinned leaves. With so many changes in plants, water, and the shape of the land, giant amphibians had a harder time finding safe places to live. Their eggs still needed to be laid in water. Their babies could not live for long outside moist ponds. Their soft skin still needed rain or cool mist, or they would dry out and die. Where ponds dried up, the amphibians gathered in the last wet spots. They crowded together, looking for food, but there was never enough for all. Some starved, some were eaten by larger animals, and many became weak and sick. The rise of reptiles made the struggle even harder. No longer were the giant amphibians the only big animals on land. The swift reptiles survived in drier areas, ate many of the same insects and small animals, and took over places where amphibians once lived alone. Reptile eggs took up space where amphibian eggs used to fill the water. The forests, swamps, and hills became a place where these two groups lived side by side. But the reptiles were growing in number each year, while the amphibians became fewer. The air also changed. For a long time, the atmosphere had been filled with much more oxygen than today. This extra oxygen had helped the amphibians and insects become large and strong. As the plants changed and the land became less wet, the amount of oxygen in the air dropped. It did not fall in a single moment. It dropped little by little over millions of years. This slow decrease in oxygen had a clear effect on all large creatures. The amphibians, with their moist skin and heavy bodies, needed thick, oxygen-rich air, especially to grow so big. As the air changed, it became harder for them to breathe and move. Baby amphibians grew more slowly and did not live as long. Insects and other large animals shrank in size. Many died young. The world started to feel smaller, quieter, and emptier in many places where there had once been so much life. Natural events also changed the land. Sometimes, huge volcanic eruptions sent ash and smoke into the sky, making the world dark and cold for a long time. Plants died without sunlight. Ponds filled with ash, making it impossible for eggs and young amphibians to live. Lava and floods wiped out entire forests. These disasters happened only sometimes, but when they did, whole populations of amphibians disappeared, leaving empty ponds and silent woods. At other times, fires burned through forests, killing plants, animals, and making it even harder for amphibians to find safe places. Usually, the wet world protected the swamps from fire, but as the earth dried, these fires became much more common. Old logs and dead plants burned fast and hot, leaving nothing but hard, dry ground behind. As each problem grew stronger, the number of giant amphibians grew smaller. Some kinds that were once common disappeared, never to be seen again. The few that survived had to search deeper into the wettest swamps, hiding where plants and water still gave them shelter. Even there, they were no longer safe. The world was changing all around them, and there was no way to return to the times of endless rain and deep green forests. Reptiles did not face the same risks. Their hard, dry skin kept in water. Their eggs survived far away from ponds. They walked on hot ground and under the sun without drying out. They began to eat different foods, spread into new places, and changed faster than amphibians could. Whole families of reptiles filled the empty spaces in the land, while amphibians struggled to hold on. Some new kinds of amphibians tried to change. A few became smaller to save energy. Others dug deeper burrows to stay cool and wet. Some even tried to live in drier places for short times, but their bodies could not keep up. Their young still needed water. Their skin still needed the cool shelter of the shade, the mist, or the mud. In every way, the world now belonged to animals that did not depend on water. As giant amphibians disappeared, the new rulers of the land continued to try new ways to live. Some reptiles grew larger, some became better hunters, and others learned to climb higher or run faster. Each new success for the reptiles meant another loss for the amphibians. Wet spots grew rarer. Old swamps dried out. Fewer giant amphibians were born each year. The story of the disappearing amphibians can still be found today, recorded in rocks from that ancient time. Paleontologists study fossil bones, footprints, and even the marks left by old skin. Some places are full of bones, showing where many amphibians died together, trapped by drying ponds, floods, or fires. Other places show only the smallest traces, a mark in stone where a tail once slid through mud, or a pattern of small eggs that never hatched. Layer by layer, the earth holds these marks and tells the story of this long, slow change. It was not a single event or one great disaster that ended the world of giant amphibians. Instead, it was a mix of many things: new animals, changing weather, new plants, less water, and less oxygen. Together, over millions of years, these changes did what no other animal or storm or fire could do. The last giant amphibians did not all die at once. In a few places where rain still filled ponds and the forests stayed green and wet, the biggest amphibians lived on for a while longer. But each year, as the land grew drier, the green forests thinned and the number of reptiles grew. The last of the giants slipped away, leaving only small and secret lives behind. When they were gone, the world felt very different. The night was quieter in the forests. Fewer sounds came from the ponds. The only amphibians left were smaller, hidden in the deep shade, jumping into pools at the first sign of trouble. They survived mostly by staying away from the new rulers and keeping to places the reptiles found uninteresting. The end of the giant amphibians was the start of something new. The forests changed again. Now there were more open spaces, more dry ground, and more types of plants and animals. The cycle of life kept moving forward, with each new creature finding a way to fit into the changing world. The world was never empty, only different. The story of the giant amphibians is a reminder of how much can change with time. Where there were once crowds of large, powerful hunters, now only little frogs and salamanders lived in puddles and streams. They hid from the sun, just as their ancient relatives had long ago. They found food where they could, laid eggs when rains came, and always stayed close to water. Even today, the bones of the ancient giants are still found by people digging deep in the earth. Every fossil is a silent witness to that lost time, a time when the world was shaped by water, green, and the endless patience of giant animals waiting in the mud. Looking at those bones, we can see not only what was lost, but also what changed, and how life continues even after the greatest creatures are gone. The green forests, the cool mist, and the endless water that supported the giant amphibians are not forgotten. Their story is carried on in the smallest frogs, in every pool of rainwater, in the quiet song after a heavy storm. Even as the world turned and new animals took over, the memory of the giants stayed alive in the places where water and earth meet. Change, always slow but always steady, turned the age of amphibians into a history written in stone and carried by their smallest living children. Small frogs, slender salamanders, and quiet toads live in wet places across the world today. They hide between leaves, under logs, near rivers, in ponds, and beneath stones. These simple creatures are what is left from an ancient and powerful family of animals. They are the living relatives of the giant amphibians that once ruled the great forests and muddy swamps hundreds of millions of years ago. Though these modern amphibians are small and their colors and habits might appear ordinary, they carry with them the memory of a time when their kind was strong and large. The frogs, toads, and salamanders that people find now in streams or under wet forest leaves still share many traits with their mighty ancestors. Their skin is soft and takes in water from the world around them. They must live in moist places because their bodies can dry out so quickly. Most of them lay eggs in water, where little tadpoles swim about after hatching, just as the ancient giants did so long ago. The need for water connects them to their past. The call of a frog after rain or the slippery dash of a salamander into a puddle is a reminder of the world before, filled with endless green and life around every muddy pond. Even the smallest frog carries inside its body a history that goes back farther than most creatures on Earth. Though these new amphibians do not have giant bodies or wide jaws, they have survived great changes, cold winters, hot summers, dry times, and floods. Over so many years, they changed in small ways. They became lighter, smaller, and quicker. These changes let them avoid new dangers, use smaller, hidden spaces, and live where water is just enough for life. If a person walks through a forest and turns soft leaves, a bright little salamander may appear underneath. In the early morning, frog eggs hang in small clusters on plant stems in fresh ponds. These are the simple signs that connect the world now to the lost world of the Carboniferous. In deep time, heavy giants waited in the shadows, but today it is the quiet presence of these tiny animals that marks the old relationship between life and water. Modern amphibians, though smaller and shyer, keep the same way of life as their ancestors. They hunt for insects, worms, and even other small amphibians. Their hunting is silent. They use sticky tongues or quick bites to catch food. They watch the world with round eyes above the water and slide quietly between shadows. In almost every country, wherever there is a patch of wet ground, a hollow stone, or a slow stream, at least one kind of frog, toad, or salamander will be hiding from the sun. The story written in rock continues to reveal more about the lost world of these giants. Fossils show wide bones, huge skulls, and long tails, marks from strong claws and heavy bodies pressed into soft mud so long ago, now found as dark lines in hard stone. Sometimes a whole skeleton is discovered, lying as it did in muddy water millions of years before. These remains are silent, but they tell of a world that changed many times and creatures that struggled, survived, or faded away. Scientists look for new clues in each fossil. They compare old bones to the bones of living frogs and salamanders. They search for patterns that might show how life changed, why some traits remain, and how modern amphibians connect to their ancient family. Each time a new fossil is found, it adds another page to the record of life on Earth. This record is long, deep, and filled with gaps, but together the fossils and living animals give a picture of great change. struggle, and survival. The connection between the ancient and modern worlds is also found in what these animals need: a home with water, a place to hide in shade, a chance to escape dryness and heat. On rainy nights, many frogs come out in force, their voices filling the air. They leap toward new puddles, mate, and lay eggs in safe places. Salamanders move under leaves, keeping close to cool, damp earth. In dry months, both can disappear for a while, hiding until the rain returns and the world feels more like the old green forests again. Though frogs, toads, and salamanders do not scare other creatures as the ancient giants did, they play a big role in the places where they live. Frogs can eat many pest insects in a single night. Salamanders help keep the soil healthy by eating bugs and mixing earth as they move. Toads dig small holes and make the ground soft. By moving, hunting, hiding, and laying eggs, these animals still shape the forest floor and wetland, just as their ancestors once did. Modern amphibians also face dangers. The world continues to change. Forests are cut down, ponds are filled in, rivers are made dirty, and the air grows warmer or sometimes colder. Many places dry out before eggs can hatch or new tadpoles can grow. New kinds of fungus, pollution, or disease can harm them in ways never seen before. These small creatures are now much weaker than their ancestors. They cannot easily move to new homes when water is lost. Around the world, many people notice when frogs are missing from their usual places. When ponds are silent or the night has no croaking voices, it is a sign that something is wrong. Amphibians are easy to lose, but their absence is felt by many other animals and plants. Without them, the cycle of hunting, eating, laying eggs, and turning dead leaves into new soil is broken. In this way, their survival is important not only as a link to the past, but as helpers for all the green places of the world. In schools and in books, children often learn about the age of the dinosaurs. But the age of amphibians came long before that. Amphibians were the first large animals to walk on land and hunt near water. Their bodies and habits became a path for other animals to try new ways of life. They opened spaces for reptiles, birds, and even mammals, each finding new directions, but all owing something to the first great amphibians. Sometimes people study the sounds of frogs at night or collect eggs from a cleaned pond to watch them grow. Watching tadpoles become frogs or seeing a salamander come out after rain gives a small living window into the ancient world. Every little jump, every slick movement under a stone is the result of millions of years and the memory of the old forests and swamps that covered the land long before. In some places, fossils from the Carboniferous are left alone in rocky fields, in coal mines, or at the edge of rivers. People find large bones so different from anything alive and wonder about the world that made them. Sometimes, tiny frogs sit on the ground above these ancient remains, not knowing the deep connection between their lives and the bones hidden beneath them. The land and the water keeps old secrets, and every discovery brings another piece of ancient life back into the light. Many scientists and nature lovers now work to protect the living amphibians. They build small pools, keep forests wet, or move young frogs and salamanders to safe new homes. Some teach others how to care for wild places, reminding everyone that these little animals are a gift from a world that is almost gone. By watching them, listening to their calls, or helping them stay safe, people join the ongoing story of change, survival, and the long line that began with the first amphibian. There is beauty in rain falling on quiet ponds. There is wonder in the life of a single frog beneath a leaf. Every river, every drop of water, and every hidden stone can be a part of this story. As the world changes more in the future, the legacy of these creatures continues only if people understand and care for water and shade, forests and swamps. The history of the ancient giants is not just about creatures that are gone or their bones that turn to stone. It is also about the life that remains here now, moving gently between water and land. Amphibians, though small, are strong in their own way. They are both old and new, a living piece of the world as it was before, and a quiet hope for what the world can still become. The Carboniferous period changed the world forever. It left a mark in deep coal, in strong stone, but also in every frog's leap and every quiet, hidden salamander. To see a tadpole swimming, to hear the sound of frogs after a storm, to help protect a quiet piece of wet land. These are ways to be close to the beginning of life on land. The giants are gone, but in every drop of water and every note in the night, their long story goes on, remembered by those who watch and listen.